There are things a woman is supposed to feel on the night before her wedding. Certainty, relief, maybe even peace. But I felt something worse. I stood in front of the mirror, watching Adrian approach me from behind. His hands moved toward the zipper. I didn't stop him. I let him believe I was frightened. I let him believe I was still the woman who trusted him. And when his fingers reached the last button, he smiled at my reflection and said, "You should have listened to me, Clara." He wasn't talking about the wedding. And what I did in the next 10 minutes is the reason Adrian spent the rest of that night believing he had finally broken me. Before we continue, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please subscribe to support us in creating more captivating stories like this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Now back to the story. My name is Clara Bennett. I was 34 one night from marrying the man I thought had saved me from my grief, and until that moment, I believed I knew exactly who he was. We met 18 months earlier, in the quietest year of my life. My father had been gone for a decade. My mother kept our family together through sheer will. Adrian arrived like something I hadn't asked for and didn't know I needed. Patient, attentive, endlessly present. He remembered small things. He called my mother every Sunday. Everyone said I was lucky. They should have said nothing. Because while I was falling in love with the man who showed up for me, Adrian had already been circling my family for years, long before he ever said hello. To understand how I ended up standing in that dress, with a knife hidden against my thigh and a man I loved turning into a stranger in front of me, you have to go back further than the night we met. You have to go back to the night my sister called me and told me not to trust him. Lily's voice had been shaking. "Clara, if anything happens to me, don't trust Adrian." I'd laughed it off, told her she was overreacting, that whatever fight she'd had with him wasn't worth this kind of drama. She hung up before I could say anything else. By morning she was gone. No calls. No messages. Her rent unpaid, her apartment untouched, her best friend's birthday missed without a word. And when I sat across from a police officer 3 days later, he slid a pamphlet toward me like it was supposed to help. "Adults are allowed to walk away from their lives, Miss Bennett." I didn't believe that. Not for 1 second. But grief has a strange way of making you grateful for anyone willing to stand beside you while the world refuses to listen. And Adrian stood beside me every single day. He drove me to the police station. He sat with me while I called Lily's friends, her old co-workers, anyone who might know something. He held my hand when I cried in parking lots. I told myself I was lucky to have him. I didn't yet understand that closeness isn't the same as innocence. It was the small things that started it. Adrian mentioned, almost in passing, that Lily had withdrawn cash from an ATM near her apartment the morning she vanished. I hadn't told him that. I hadn't told anyone that. "The investigator must have mentioned it," he said when I asked. "There was no investigator yet." Not then. A week later, he referenced a cafe on Belmore Street, said Lily used to go there. I'd never heard of it. When I asked how he knew, he shrugged and said Lily had mentioned it once in passing months ago. Lily didn't mention things to Adrian. Lily barely tolerated him. Then there was the fight. He knew in specific and uncomfortable detail about an argument Lily had with her boyfriend the week before she disappeared. What was said, how it ended, who slammed the door. I hadn't heard that story from anyone. Not even from Lily. Whenever I brought her name up after that, something in Adrian's face would tighten, just slightly, like a door closing before I could see what was behind it. I told myself it was grief. I told myself he was trying to help me hold on to her, in his own clumsy way. I found the bracelet 3 weeks later. It was wedged into the seam of the passenger seat in Adrian's car, a thin silver chain with a tiny crescent moon. Lily's. She never took it off, not since our father gave it to her the year before he died. I held it up when Adrian came out of the house. "She must have dropped it," he said, too quickly, reaching for his keys instead of the bracelet. "Weren't you two in my car back in the spring?" We weren't. But it wasn't the lie that stopped my breath. It was that he never once asked where I'd found it. He already knew. After that, I started watching him the way you watch a stranger, noticing things I used to explain away. The calls from unmarked numbers that ended the moment I walked into the room. The way he'd angle his phone screen down on the table. One night, while he was out, I let myself into his office. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for a reason to stop feeling crazy. In the bottom drawer of an old filing cabinet, beneath a stack of tax documents, I found a photograph. For people, faded at the edges. My father. A man I didn't recognize. Adrian, younger, unmistakably Adrian. And Lily. I turned it over with shaking hands. The night we fixed everything. The photograph was at least a decade old. Adrian had told me we met by chance, at a mutual friend's dinner party, 18 months ago. He had been lying to me since the very first sentence. I couldn't take that photograph to the police. Not yet. Not without proof they couldn't dismiss the way they'd dismissed everything else. So I hired Marcus Reed. I found his name buried in an old file of my father's, a former analyst at Bennett Holdings who'd quit abruptly 11 years ago. 2 months before my father died. When I called him, he was quiet for a long moment before he agreed to meet me. I've been waiting for someone to ask me about your father for a decade, he said. Marcus wasn't like the investigators in movies. He was tired in the way people get when they've carried something too long, and no one ever asked them to put it down. He told me he'd left the company after finding discrepancies in the books, money moving in patterns that didn't belong in a legitimate business. He tried to raise it with my father. 2 weeks later, my father was dead of what everyone called a heart attack, and Marcus had been too afraid to say anything at all. I should have pushed harder, he told me. Maybe I could have saved him. Finding out what happened to your father is the least I owe him. It took him 10 days to bring me something that changed everything. Adrian and my father had known each other. Not casually, through Victor Hale, a name I recognized only vaguely from old business dinners. Marcus found a wire transfer, dated 3 weeks after my father's death, from one of Victor's shell companies directly into an account under Adrian's name. That's not a coincidence, Clara, Marcus said, sliding the printout across the table. That's a payment. He'd also found gaps, entire quarters of financial records missing from the same period, scrubbed so cleanly it had to have been deliberate. And buried in an old email thread. A single line from my father to his lawyer, sent 9 days before he died. I need this documented somewhere they can never touch it. Your father wasn't afraid of losing his company, Marcus said quietly. He was afraid of what would happen if certain people discovered what he'd copied. An archive. Something encrypted, something hidden, something my father had built specifically so it would survive him. Nobody, not Marcus, not the lawyer, not me knew where it was. I sat with that for a long time after Marcus left. Because if Adrian had known my father, had taken money connected to his death, then nothing about us had been an accident. Not the party where we met. Not the way he'd happened to be reading the one book I'd mentioned loving in an interview once, years ago. Not the way he always seemed to already understand me before I explained myself. I used to think that was intimacy. Now I wondered if it was research. I thought about our first conversation. The way he'd said my name like he'd practiced it. The way he knew within weeks exactly which wine I preferred, which streets I avoided, which anniversary of my father's death made me quiet every year. I had called it fate. Fate doesn't need a case file. 3 days later, Marcus called again, and this time his voice had lost its careful calm. Clara, I found something in the property records. A rental Adrian kept under a business name. A unit 2 blocks from your old apartment. So, the lease started 4 months before the night you two met. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Adrian hadn't found me that night. He'd already been watching me long before he ever let me find him. The email arrived 3 weeks after Lily vanished, from an address that bounced back the moment I tried to reply. No name. No explanation. Just one line, sitting alone in an otherwise empty message. He's going to marry you because he needs what Dad left behind. Attached was a single photograph. A squat brick building with boarded windows, half swallowed by overgrown ivy. It took me a moment to place it. Then my stomach dropped. It was my father's old storage property. A building he'd used for overflow records before the company modernized, decades ago. I hadn't thought about it in years. I wasn't even sure it still belonged to us. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell anyone. I drove there myself on a Tuesday afternoon, telling Adrian I had a client meeting. The lock on the side door was broken, not rusted, broken recently. Inside, dust covered everything except a narrow path through the center of the room, like someone had walked it more than once. Old filing cabinets lined the walls, half of them gutted. A security camera hung from the ceiling, its wire sliced clean. Someone had been here. More than once. I went through the cabinets methodically, my hands shaking less with fear than with the strange, electric certainty that I was finally close to something real. Old accounting ledgers. Photographs of my father at company events, younger than I remembered him, and bolted into the back wall, half hidden behind a collapsed shelf, a small metal compartment with a keypad lock. I couldn't open it. Not that day. But on the floor beside it, tucked under a loose floorboard, I found a folded scrap of paper. The handwriting stopped me cold. Lily's. Don't trust the obvious villain. No date. No context. Just that one sentence, in my sister's unmistakable slanted print. Left somewhere she must have believed I'd eventually find it. I'd spent weeks assuming Victor Hale was the center of all of this. The name Marcus kept circling, the money trail that led back to him. But if Lily had written this, if she'd wanted me to see it, then maybe Victor wasn't the architect of anything. Maybe he was someone else's cover. I drove home that night rattled in a way I couldn't fully explain to myself, and walked straight into a version of Adrian I hadn't seen in months. He'd made dinner. Candles, the good wine, the playlist from our first anniversary. He took my hands across the table, and told me he didn't want to wait any longer. Let's move the wedding up, he said. Next month. I don't want to lose any more time with you. 6 months earlier, I would have cried with happiness. Now all I heard was urgency. A man who suddenly needed something to be settled, finalized, signed, before I found whatever he was afraid I'd find. I smiled at him the way I used to mean it. Let's get married sooner, I said. Relief flooded his face, so genuine it almost made me hate myself. He thought I'd surrendered. He thought the woman across the table trusted him completely. He had no idea I'd started building a trap. That night, while he slept, I slid his ring off my own finger in the dark bathroom and studied it under the light. The ring he'd proposed with, the one he'd chosen so carefully, or so I'd once believed. I had an identical replica made weeks ago, the day Marcus first mentioned the word evidence. I didn't know why exactly. Some instinct told me to keep it close. I made the switch that night, sliding the replica onto my finger, and hiding the original in the lining of my jewelry box. Only then, running my thumb along the band, did I feel it. A seam. Impossibly small. A compartment where none should exist. I didn't open it. Not yet. For the next 2 weeks, I became someone else. A version of myself Adrian recognized. One he could relax around again. I laughed at his jokes. I let him plan the wedding without pushing back. I told him gently over dinner one night that I'd finally let go of the search for Lily. I think I need to accept she doesn't want to be found, I said, and watched something in his shoulders unknot for the first time in months. He believed me. That was the point. He grew warmer after that. More present. But underneath the warmth, I started noticing a pattern. Small, careful questions dropped into ordinary conversation like stones into water, waiting to see how far the ripples traveled. Did your father ever mention a safe? He asked one evening, not looking up from his plate. Something private. Separate from the company. A safe? I kept my voice light, confused. No. Why would you ask that? No reason. Just something someone mentioned once. He asked again differently a week later. Something about old family properties, whether my father had ever talked about hiding important documents. Each time, I gave him nothing. Each time, I lied a little better than the last. I didn't tell him about the ledger. I didn't tell him about the locked compartment in the storage building, or the ring, or Lily's warning still folded in my coat pocket. Marcus called me on a Thursday, his voice tight in a way I'd learned to take seriously. Adrian's using a second phone, he said. Prepaid, untraceable, activated 8 months ago. I managed to get partial call logs. Who's he talking to? I don't know. The contact is saved under a single letter. R. My chest went cold. R for what? I don't know, Clara. But it's not casual. Some of these calls last over an hour. I thought of my father's name, before I could stop myself. Richard. But my father had been dead for 11 years. Whoever R was, it wasn't him. That night, another message arrived from the same untraceable address Lily had used before. He's closer than you think. No explicación. No name. Just 5 words that kept me awake until nearly 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, running through every person Adrian had ever introduced me to, searching for someone I'd overlooked. I couldn't wait any longer. I took the original ring from the lining of my jewelry box, and, under the lamp at my desk, found the seam again with the edge of a sewing needle. It took almost 20 minutes. When it finally gave way, a tiny compartment opened, no larger than a grain of rice. Inside was a micro-storage device. My hands shook as I connected it to my laptop. One file. No name, just a date, 11 years old, 3 days before my father died. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, sharper and angrier than I'd ever heard him. He was arguing with someone, demanding answers about money that didn't belong where it was, insisting he wouldn't stay silent. Then a second voice answered him. Adrian's voice. Younger, but unmistakable. I sat frozen as my father's fiancé, the man sleeping down the hall, the man I was set to marry in 3 weeks, spoke calmly into a memory I hadn't known existed. He had been there, in that room, the night before my father died. I don't remember deciding to cry. I just remember the sound tearing out of me. One hand pressed over my mouth, so it wouldn't carry through the house. The recording ended with my father's voice, quieter now, almost resigned. If anything happens to me, he said, my daughters must never know who you really are. There was a pause. A third sound, a chair shifting, someone else breathing in the room. Someone my father was talking to who wasn't Adrian at all. The recording cut off before I could hear who. 24 hours before my wedding, I sat across from Marcus in a coffee shop 3 towns over, sliding him a copy of the audio file with hands that had finally stopped shaking. This is enough to open a real investigation, he said. Once we add the wire transfers, the missing records, Clara, this could actually work. It has to work tomorrow, I said. Not next week. He'd already contacted a detective he trusted from outside the local precinct, someone with no ties to Victor Hale's old business circles. They were building a file. But even Marcus admitted it. We still didn't know where Lily was. Every lead ended at the same locked door. Then Victor called me himself. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice was quiet, almost tired. Adrian isn't the man you think he is, he said. Did you kill my father? Silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Ask yourself why Adrian has spent 11 years protecting someone, he said instead, and ended the call before I could push further. Protecting someone. Not working for someone. Not obeying someone. Protecting. That single word rearranged everything I thought I understood. I had assumed Adrian was Victor's instrument, a man paid to chase down my father's evidence on someone else's orders. But protection wasn't the language of an employee. It was the language of loyalty. Marcus called an hour later, his voice grim. He'd finally cracked part of Adrian's financial pattern. And it wasn't leading toward a wedding. It was leading toward an exit. A private account. A one-way flight booked for 2 days after the ceremony. And insurance paperwork, recently amended, with a payout structure that made sense only one way. Adrian didn't need me dead immediately. He needed me to talk first. Then he needed me gone. Quietly, plausibly, the kind of disappearance the police could file under runaway bride or fragile woman. Wedding day pressure, tragic ending. Grief would explain everything. No one would look twice. I was still sitting with that thought when I heard him come up the stairs. He knocked once before opening the door, the way he always did, like he still believed he had the right to. You've been keeping something from me, he said, closing it behind him. I turned from the mirror. What are you talking about? The safe. His voice had lost its softness entirely. Where is your father's evidence, Clara? I made myself go still. Confused. Innocent. What safe? He crossed the room faster than I expected, his hand closing around my arm. There was no charm left in his face at all now. Only impatience, and beneath it, something colder. Don't, he said. Not tonight. Where is it? I looked at him, at the man I had once believed loved me, and let 11 years of grief and 3 weeks of quiet fury finally rise to the surface. I know what happened to my father, I said. His grip tightened. And I know what happened to Lily. Whatever mask Adrian had worn for 18 months simply dissolved. What remained underneath was something I'd never let myself see before. Flat, calculating, entirely without warmth. You shouldn't have said that, he said quietly, and reached for the zipper of my dress. I didn't fight him. My hand drifted, slow and steady, toward the hem of my dress, toward the small blade hidden against my thigh. I never got the chance to reach it. Someone knocked on the door. Adrian's head snapped toward it, his hand still tangled in the zipper of my dress. For a moment neither of us moved. Then the door opened without waiting for an answer. Lily stood in the doorway. Alive. I don't know what sound I made. Something between a sob and a name. She looked thinner than I remembered, harder around the eyes, but she was standing, breathing, real. And for one suspended second nothing else in the room mattered at all. Then I saw who was behind her. Victor Hale. And behind him, 2 police officers moving fast past him into the room. Adrian released me and stumbled backward like the floor had shifted under him. This isn't, he started and then stopped, because there was nothing left to finish that sentence with. You didn't kidnap her, I said slowly, understanding arriving in pieces. She left on her own. Lily nodded, her eyes never leaving Adrian. Someone inside the investigation was feeding information straight back to him. I found out 3 days before I disappeared. I couldn't call you, Clara. I didn't know who was listening. Victor was the only person I could trust. Victor, I repeated, staring at the man I'd spent weeks believing was the architect of everything. I worked with your father, Victor said quietly. Before any of this. I've spent 11 years trying to find out who really killed him. I only let people believe I was the villain because it kept me close enough to watch. He looked at Adrian. It kept me close enough to watch him. I reached beneath my dress and drew the knife from my garter. Adrian flinched, bracing himself. I didn't move toward him. I set it on the table between us instead, blade down, and watched the officers stop, watched Adrian's breathing change as he understood, really understood, that I had walked into this night already prepared for exactly who he was. You knew, he said hoarse. The whole time you knew. I've known for weeks. I pressed the small catch at the base of the handle. The compartment clicked open. Inside, small enough to have been overlooked 100 times, sat the micro-storage device I'd found inside his ring. Adrian went pale. That's impossible, he said. I checked that ring. I've had it checked. You checked the replica, I said. I switched it 3 weeks ago. Something in him seemed to collapse inward, 11 years of searching undone in a single sentence. He sank into the chair by the window, and for a moment, the calculating stranger I'd faced minutes earlier looked almost human again, tired, cornered, done pretending. Richard was going to destroy everything, he said, quiet now, almost pleading. The company, Victor, all of it. Victor forced me into this from the start. I didn't have a choice. And then Lily found out too much and I panicked, and he looked at me. I only got close to you because I needed to find what he hid. That's all it was supposed to be. I wanted badly to believe that was the whole truth, that the cruelty had a ceiling. Then he said one more thing. Your father was still talking when I left the room that night. He was fine. Whatever happened to him happened after. I went very still. No one had told him what room. No one had told him my father died at home, alone, after everyone believed he'd been fine when his last visitor left. Adrian had just described being there, not hearing about it later. Being there, at the end, close enough to know exactly how the night unfolded. Lily's eyes met mine across the room. She caught it too. Adrian wasn't just connected to my father's death. He'd been in the room when it happened. Who else was there? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. Adrian's jaw worked, like the answer was physically difficult to release. I can't. You've protected this person for 11 years, I said, remembering Victor's words on the phone. Ask yourself why. Because if I tell you, Adrian said quietly, you'll wish I hadn't. Lily stepped forward, and something in her face told me she already knew. It's Mom, Clara. The room seemed to tilt. That's not possible, I said. But even as I said it, pieces I'd never let myself examine began sliding into place. The money my mother had always seemed to have unexplained access to, the way she'd changed after my father died, brittle and distant in a way grief alone never fully explained. Marcus's files, spread across the table, told the rest. 11 years ago, before my father died, he discovered money moving out of the company in patterns that led back to my mother. Not theft for herself. Payments, recurring and desperate. To someone connected to an old scandal buried deep in the Bennett family's past. Someone who had been quietly bleeding her for years. Threatening to expose something none of us had ever been told. My father had found it. And rather than protect her silently, he'd planned to expose everyone. The blackmailer, the scandal, all of it. Believing the truth, however ugly, was safer than the debt. My mother panicked. She'd reached out to Adrian, then working under Victor, and asked for help burying the financial trail before my father could act. Adrian agreed. It was supposed to be a cover-up, nothing more. But the night my father confronted her, the argument became something neither of them intended. Adrian told us the rest with his eyes on the floor, unable to look at either of us. It wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to happen at all. But it did, and afterward, Adrian was the one who helped erase what remained of that night. And when you realized my father had hidden a backup somewhere, I said slowly, you thought I could lead you to it. I thought you were the only person who might, he said. I didn't come looking for you because I loved you, Clara. I came looking because I thought you were the key. I made myself breathe through it. Lily's hand found mine. I found out about Mom 8 weeks before I disappeared, she said. I couldn't go to the police. I didn't know how deep it went. I couldn't come to you without proof. So I left to get it. I drove to my mother's house that night with Marcus's files still in my hands. She didn't deny it. She sat very still at her kitchen table and told me everything, her voice steady in a way that frightened me more than tears would have. When I asked why my father hadn't simply exposed her from the start, she looked at me strangely. He knew, she said. He always knew what I'd done. But he didn't build that archive to destroy me, Clara. He built it so that someday, you and Lily would find the truth yourselves, on your own terms, when you were ready to survive it. Later that night, Marcus finally cracked the last layer of encryption on my father's hidden files. One video remained, recorded days before he died. I pressed play, and my father's face filled the screen, tired but steady. If you're watching this, Clara, he said, it means the man you love was never the person you thought he was. He paused like he'd rehearsed what came next and still couldn't make it easy. But don't blame Adrian for the worst part. My father's voice continued, steady even as it delivered the rest. Your mother made a mistake born of fear, and it became something none of us can undo. Adrian helped bury it, but he was young, frightened, and working for people far more dangerous than himself. Victor knows more than he's ever admitted, and Lily, if you're watching this too, you were always braver than any of us gave you credit for. He paused and his voice softened. I built this trail because I couldn't stop what was coming, but I could make sure that someday, the truth would find you both, on your own terms. The recording ended. For a long moment, none of us in that room spoke. Then it was over. Quickly, procedurally, the way these things apparently end once enough evidence exists. Adrian was arrested that night, my mother the following morning. Victor cooperated fully, trading disclosure for whatever protection the investigators could offer him, filling in the last gaps Marcus's files couldn't reach. I thought I would feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt hollowed out, like grief had found a second use for the same wound. Lily found me sitting alone on the porch steps 2 nights later. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for disappearing, for letting you believe. You didn't abandon me, I told her, and meant it completely. You survived. She cried then, and so did I, and for the first time in months it felt like relief instead of collapse. I saw Adrian once more briefly before they took him. He looked at me with something that might have been genuine regret, though I'd stopped trusting my ability to tell the difference. Did you ever love me? He asked. I considered lying. I didn't. I loved the man you pretended to be, I said. But I learned to love myself more. He didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and set the small knife inside it, the blade wrapped in cloth. I didn't need it anymore. It had never really been about Adrian, or even about protection. It had been about the woman I'd had to become to survive him. Careful, watchful, ready for anything. I could put her away now too, at least for tonight. One file remained on the archive Marcus had recovered. A short note, time-stamped just days before my father died, separate from everything else. Clara, if you've made it this far, you should know Adrian was watching you before you ever met him. I found out too late to stop it, so I made sure the truth would outlive me instead. I don't know who sent him to you first. That answer wasn't mine to find. The message ended there. Unfinished. A question my father hadn't lived long enough to answer, hanging in the space where a name should have been. I closed the laptop and didn't open it again that night. Some mysteries I was learning don't resolve so much as they get set down, carried until you're strong enough to keep walking without needing every answer first. I stood in front of my mirror the next morning, the same mirror where Adrian had once unzipped my dress, and asked me where my father's secrets were buried. I looked at my reflection for a long time. No fear this time. No performance. No knife hidden anywhere on me. Just Clara, finally entirely my own.